Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror and detail. Today, we will share real Wendigo horror stories that will send shivers down your spine. First story. I was sent to hunt a man who turned into a Wendigo. I failed miserably. Alright, I'm not much of a writer, but I've been stuck for hours and I'm bored as hell, so here goes nothing. I'm part of a team that captures, but mostly kills, monsters. And when I say monsters, I mean legitimate monsters. Stuff like chupacabras, manticores, werewolves, and so on and so forth. We're not unique, not by any means. There are hundreds of teams dedicated to the same thing all over the world. And my team isn't necessarily the best one out there, but we're good, and I trust my teammates with my life, all four of them. We've been on dozens of missions, and I used to think that we were prepared for anything. But now, one of my teammates is dead, and the rest of us are injured and stuck in the back of an armored truck with a 3-meter-tall Wendigo screeching outside. I'm going to be stuck here for the foreseeable future, and my teammates are all unconscious, so I've got nothing but time. I guess I'll start with how I got into this business, and how it works. It'll explain how I got into this mess. I was in the military, not going to say where, and I was good. Extremely good. Incredibly gifted in terms of both physical and mental strength. Good with weapons too. I never thought it would really mean much. Where I come from, the military is conscription-based, which basically means that if you're a man, you're mandated to drop everything and serve in the military for 2 years. If you don't go to the military, you go to jail instead. Fun. I figured I'd just serve my 2 years, finish, go to university, get a degree in mechanical engineering, and live out the rest of my life. I thought all my military accomplishments would serve for nothing, but just an interesting tidbit about me. But clearly, that wasn't the case. Just a few weeks before my 2 years were up, I was pulled into a room, which I never knew existed, and I was immediately met with some of the highest-ranking officers I've seen in my life. Initially, I thought they found out about the empty shell casing I smuggled out from a live, firing for a souvenir a couple months ago, and I was bracing myself for a court-martial and a trip to the detention barracks. Hey, I never said I was good at following rules, but that wasn't the case. They told me how impressed they were by my performance, and they were transferring me to a special team based in another country, one whose name I've never heard of, made up of elite soldiers from all over the world. I would go there and continue training for another 4 years, and I would actually be sent out on real military operations. And I wasn't allowed to say no, either. Initially, I was pissed. I had dreams, aspirations, stuff I actually wanted to do. Not to mention I had just got a girlfriend, and we were still in the honeymoon phase. The idea of just dropping everything and being forced into military service again was maddening. That, and the whole real military operations thing. I mean, sure, I could hit 100% of the targets at the firing range, do 95 clean push-ups in a minute, and run for kilometers with a 15-kilogram bag strapped to me, but that doesn't necessarily mean I could fight terrorists or anything. I wanted to argue, make them change their mind, think I wasn't a good fit for it, maybe even tell them about the shell casing. But before I could voice my protest, they showed me the pay. Oh my God, the pay. So much money. And they promised it would only go up. Now, where I live, the cost of living is high. Very high. Not to mention, I was a little money hungry at the time. I didn't want to become an engineer for the sense of accomplishment, if you get my meaning. So not only did I need the money, I wanted the money. I had a lot of stuff to pay for. I would have to get a house, a car, and a wedding ring for the girlfriend. Yes, I was planning on proposing. Oh, and also steroids. I take steroids. So, I went along with it. I got all my things together, hugged the parents, kissed the girlfriend, had one last drink with the boys, and went off to another country. Went to a base in the middle of nowhere with a team made up of 20 people. Yup, the whole base for 20 people. I can still hear the Wendigo screaming. It's very distracting, just so you know. Back to the story. And then the training started. It was brutal. Way worse than anything I've ever experienced. At least in the regular military, safety is a concern, albeit not a huge one. Here, safety was unheard of. The trainers, which is all I can call them, since there were no ranks on the base, pushed us as hard as humanly possible, and sometimes inhumanely. Once, they gave us no food for a week. Another time, they snuck into our bunk and turned OFF the safeties on our guns. We had live rounds loaded, by the way. We were supposed to keep our guns loaded and with us at all times. We got screamed at for hours for that one. They said if we were real soldiers, we wouldn't have let that happen. Many times I wanted to punch one of them right in the face. It's a literal miracle everyone made it to the end of training with their sanities and bodies intact. Maybe the steroids had something to do with that. I had to hide my use back in my home country, but here they actively encouraged it. They even bought us needles and everything. Reason being was, according to them, if injecting yourself with a gram of testosterone every week makes you run faster, lift heavier, recover quicker, and just basically be a better soldier, then you should do it. At the end of training, we were briefed on our operations too. They told us we were going to see and do things we never would have imagined. They told us monsters were real. Initially, we all laughed, and then were punished for laughing. They made us run 5 kilometers, then continued the briefing. They told us we would be hunting monsters, but only those that were a threat to people. And we wouldn't always kill them, sometimes just capture them, because some monsters, like minotaurs, produce certain substances that can cure disease. Meanwhile, peaceful creatures, like Sasquatch, would be left alone. All of this said with a straight face. I still thought it was all a big joke. I mean, who wouldn't, right? But then they showed us videos. I still remember them, frame for frame. Monsters eating people, tearing people apart, nightmare stuff. And not to mention the video quality. You can't fake stuff that well. They sent us on our first mission a week after, put us on a private jet, and flew us off to Japan. Said we were looking for something called Gashadakuro, supposed to be a giant skeleton that eats people. Which I mean, how do you keep the public unaware of something like that? A skeleton as big as a tree, just walking around, straight out of Clash Royale. What? So I clash a little. Big deal. I've got to hand it to the cover-up guys. They don't get the credit they deserve. We found it eventually. 2 of them. Actually, wasn't hard to be honest. They were over 20 meters tall in the middle of a rice field. According to legend, these things were supposed to only attack lone travelers. The village they had just massacred said otherwise. They saw us, let out a bellow, and sprinted straight at us. We ran straight towards the nearby tree line, hoping the oak trees would impede the monsters. One guy wasn't so lucky. He was always the slowest during group runs. He got snatched up, and the skeleton just bit his head clean off. At least his death was instant. Thank God for that. Speaking of instant deaths, I can still hear that Wendigo shuffling around outside. Maybe I should speed up my riding a bit. We took down both of the monsters with rockets. Now, according to folklore, from hundreds of years ago, the Gashadakuro are supposed to be invincible. But they didn't have RPGs hundreds of years ago, did they? When all you've got is a spear against a skeleton 15 times your size, it's going to seem invincible. Props to people from ancient times. I don't know how they survived against these things. So that was my first encounter with the supernatural. We went on a lot more missions after that. Eventually, as we got better, we started getting split up into smaller teams. I started to actually enjoy it. I was only interested in money in the beginning, but a sense of accomplishment started coming with it. I remember the first time I really felt proud of what I did. We were in some town in Greece, with a really small population, less than 10,000. There was a manticore absolutely demolishing the place. It was tearing its way through a row of houses when we came across it, busting through a wall while a family on the other side was screaming for help. We took it down and went to check on the family. There was a little girl, who couldn't have been more than 6 years old, who ran up and hugged me. My heart melted a little. I'm not going to lie. I've always been fond of children. Her parents were probably scared of us, a bunch of guys with heavy weaponry and armor, but she wasn't. She just knew we saved her life, and she was thankful. I really thought about the impact of my job on that day. So, I was making bank and loving my job. Life was far from perfect, but it was good. And then one day it came. The mission that screwed up my entire life. We were sent off to Canada. There was a confirmed Wendigo presence in a forest very near a town, and people were starting to disappear. We had to take it down ASAP. Not a capture, a kill. Now, this Wendigo was particularly interesting. It used to be a human. That's pretty rare. Apparently, most Wendigos were made by a spirit in the sky or something, and the real ones are a lot stauncher than the people who become Wendigos. This specific Wendigo used to be a guy named Ned Terrell. He went off into the forest with his girlfriend, ironically, to look for a Wendigo, and they got lost in a blizzard or something. Then a few weeks later he turned up and started eating people. A bunch of doctors just figured he lost it, and they locked him up. They said he had convinced himself he was a Wendigo, and that it was best for everyone that he stay locked in his room for the rest of his life. He even wrote a letter, pretending he was a Wendigo that got captured by humans. You can read it here. Creepy stuff. But the thing is, Mr. Terrell wasn't so crazy after all. A couple months after they locked him up, the doctors noticed something. He was growing. A lot. Now, Terrell was already a pretty big guy. About 2 meters, if I remember his profile correctly. Then one day, one of the doctors, I think his name was Bowman, realized he was a lot taller. They measured him, and he was 2.18 meters tall. A while after that, he was 2.34 meters. But even though he kept growing taller, he kept losing weight. Started at svelte 80 kilograms, he was pretty underweight after living in the forest and eating people for a couple months, and ended at 56 kilograms. And he kept getting stronger too. One day he leapt at the guards and took a chunk out of one guy's arm. Thank God for tranq darts. They hit him with enough stuff to take down an elephant. That was the day they decided they had to transfer him out to a more secure facility. They knew they were dealing with something they didn't have the ability to handle. So they threw him into a truck and transported him to a maximum security prison that was a couple hours away. At least that was the plan. Halfway there, he ate the driver. The guards busted out and ran off. Pretty soon, reports of a giant, emaciated man running through the forest and roaring his head off reached us. We sent a scout who identified it, or I guess him, as a Wendigo, and my team was sent in. Now, according to legend, humans can turn into Wendigos when they choose to resort to cannibalism instead of starving, or they can be possessed and forced to commit cannibalism by Wendigos. Which one is Terrell? Personally, I'm hoping he's the second option. At least that way, he dies with his humanity intact. The sounds outside have died down a little. Mr. Terrell must have gotten bored. I can relax a bit. We went out into the forest, the 5 of us. Body armor, assault rifles, grenades, rockets, all of it. We thought we could take him. We could not. It started off so slowly. We found its tracks and started following them. There was a blizzard going on, which is apparently something Wendigos can do. There's a blizzard going on now, actually, but my team had no problems. We followed them in our armored truck for an hour or so. Then all of a sudden, it was just on top of us. Never saw where it came from. Unbelievable speed. It tore my teammate out of the driver's seat and swallowed him whole. He was a big dude too, 1.9 meters tall and built like a young Brock Lesnar. Just got swallowed up, starting from the feet. He screamed the whole time too. I'll never forget it. The Wendigo just unhinged its jaws and leapt on him. One movement, he was suddenly swallowed up to his waist. The truck crashed and the rest of us jumped out and ran for cover. I'll admit it, even professionals get scared. We just watched our teammate get eaten. Took a while too. He was screaming and begging, one arm pinned to his side and the other flailing around. He had broken the #1 rule. Always have your gun loaded and with you. So there was nothing he could do. It took us a few seconds, but we opened fire. The Wendigo was squatting on top of the truck, its jaws now around the guy's chest. We killed our teammate, but he was dead anyway. We just granted him mercy. We emptied our mags at that thing, and we only hit it twice. Visibility was poor due to the blizzard, and like I said, it was fast. Seriously, faster than anything I've ever seen. It stood up, and it was huge. Absolutely dwarfed us. It was thin as a rake too, ribs nearly tearing through its skin, skeletal arms, kneecaps very visible. I saw a photo of a family of Indian villagers during the Madras famine once. It looked just like them, very human looking. Just looking at its face, you would think it was just a starving man. I saw a picture of Mr. Terrell, back when he was a regular guy. You could definitely tell it was him. It tipped the truck over and sprinted straight for us, lashed out, tearing through our armor like it was cardboard. One of us, I don't even remember who, got a grenade off. Unfortunately, not a direct impact, but still made it back off for a while at least. We jumped straight into the back of the truck and put it into lockdown mode. If you're slow and can't figure out what lockdown mode does, it locks the truck down. Metal covers sliding over the windows, a bunch of electronic locks, makes it a fortress. Unfortunately, it also prevents it from driving, because the wheels withdraw into the body. The Wendigo started slamming on the doors, but it couldn't get in. It's strong, but not that strong. So that brings us back to where we started. I sent a distress signal out a while ago, but I got no response. The blizzard may be blocking our communications. The snow's coming down really hard. It's freezing, even with the truck's heater. I'm really hungry for some reason too. I can't have been here for more than a couple hours, but I'm absolutely starving. Even the time I didn't get food for a week at base wasn't this bad. I'm ravenous, but there's no food, and I sure as hell am not going out there. I won't make it very far. My teammates are still out for the count. I don't really know what to do now. I can't hear the Wendigo, but as long as the blizzard's here, I know it's out there. There's a video feed of the outside, but I turned it off. I need to conserve energy. The last I saw the Wendigo, it was eating the snow my teammates' blood spilled on. This thing leaves no traces. It would probably lick blood off the walls if it could. It can't get in, but I can't go out. The situation seems pretty hopeless. But hey, if you're reading this, that means I made it out. I'm typing on the Notes app on my phone, so the only way for someone to see this is if I get out of here. I'm going to take a little break and think about what to do now. Goodbye. Hey guys, I found this story on a phone in the back of a wrecked truck I came across while hiking through the woods. I called the cops as soon as I saw it, but I snooped through it to find any valuables, and I found this. What do you guys think? It's probably just some BS, right? I mean, there aren't any bodies in the truck, or blood even, which, if this is real, should be the case. There was a really heavy blizzard a day ago, but that's just regular Canadian weather, right? Wendigos and monsters, they're made up, right? Maybe some aspiring writer crashed and decided to just type a story while he waited for help, then just left his phone and walked away? That doesn't make sense. And the truck was crazy. It was more of a tank than a truck. I don't think writers would really drive stuff like that. And there were a bunch of weapons too. I didn't touch them though. I'm wearing pretty thick gloves, but I can't risk getting any of my DNA on a firearm. I'm out on probation right now. There were prints leading away from the truck at least. Only one set though, and they were huge. I mean seriously. This guy was big. Barefoot too. I hope he made it out all right. I'm walking back to my house while typing this. I still don't know what to make of it. The only way it adds up is if the story is real, but it can't be, right? I mean, I would have seen something by now. Whatever. I already told the cops and they're on the way. They'll figure it out and I'll read about it in the paper tomorrow. I'm just going to focus on getting home now. It's starting to snow pretty heavily again, and the wind's picking up. I hope it's not a blizzard. Second story. There's something wrong with the deer in my town. Every expert in town, read. Not necessarily educated people who spent their entire life around deer, have no idea what the problem is. It's just the darndest thing, has become the town's catchphrase lately, and it's the only thing anyone is talking about. Maybe you Redditors can help me figure this out, and maybe even put a stop to it. Let me provide you guys with some background. I live in the town of Briar Ridge, Oregon. It's a small town encased in forest, with one road in or out. There's a lot of rain, a lot of conifers, and a lot of deer hunters, mostly because there's a lot of deer and not much else to do. We have a hunting store, a grocery store, an A&W, a town pump, and that about covers it. In the summer, we get a few college kids here and there who want to try hiking, hunting, or camping. So they stay in the pass-through motel in town and get lost in the mountain range, and inevitably, every year, some townsfolk organize a search party to back up the rangers until they're found. Some of the townsfolk who think they're hilarious have set up a betting pool of various criteria for the season's lost and found hikers. Age, size of the hiking party, level of actual preparedness, and level of drunkenness. These lost hikers are usually found within a few days, and by the end of summer they all disperse back to whatever cave dorm they came from, and everyone goes back to business as usual. In the fall, the leaves just about suffocate every flat surface available to them, and the rain makes sure nobody is dry for a good couple of months. But it's also deer hunting season in the fall, so it's generally everyone's favorite season, and all the excitement, barbecues, and drunken bullshit begin and end there. In the winter, it's sometimes snowy, sometimes festive, always quiet. Except for the deer. I don't know what it is, but the peaceful quiet of the winter brings the deer out of the depths of the forest like moths to a lantern. One of my favorite things to do when I can't sleep is to put a coat and shoes on and walk out onto my street in my pajamas and watch the deer in the fog. It's beautiful in an ethereal kind of way to see their lithe forms calmly ghost through the night, lit up by the occasional street light. Some people feed them by putting out piles of corn and oats in their yards. Some people set up trail cameras. Most people just leave them alone. Everyone knows that the deer haunt the town at night, so the rare nighttime driver knows to drive slowly. But lately, something's changed with them, and I'm going to get to the bottom of it. It started with Miriam Miller hitting a deer on the old country trail. The trail is a gravel road that leads to the Miller's homestead, a gourd and squash farm with a coupla chickens and a useless rooster. The Millers have lived here for 3 generations, building the homestead out of an Old West cabin outpost, hence the name of the trail. My point is that Mrs. Miller has been driving that trail since she first got behind the wheel, and she has absolutely no reason to be driving faster than maybe 5 miles per hour. And yet the deer that went through her windshield looked like she had either driven into it at 60 miles per hour, or it had full-on leaped into her windshield antlers first with the full intent to go through it. The latter one is the story she has been telling everyone since she got out of the hospital with all that bandaging around her head and chest. Mrs. Miller is 86, and with the blood loss and concussion, nobody really believed her at first. The second incident was when Rob, the owner of the hunting store, was out on his usual end-of-season deer hunt. Story goes, he had gotten to his usual spot, set up camp, and was trying to heat some dinner over his campfire. Rob isn't the brightest guy around, and he was opening a can with a knife. Inevitably, the knife slips and grazes his thigh with it. Not life-threatening, but it was bleeding pretty good. Halfway through patching up his leg, Rob spots a deer entering the clearing he had set up camp in. Rob reached for his rifle. I mean, he couldn't believe it. What hunter is so lucky the deer came to him? Easiest hunt of his life, right? Well, before he could even get his hands on the gun, the deer lunges at him and bites him. Hard. Not just once, but several times, drawing blood, kicking him to the ground and pinning him there. As Rob tells it, the damn thing bit him hard enough on the forearm to break it, too, and the cast proves the break. Just not necessarily that a deer did that to him. This is another one nobody would believe if it weren't for the flat, teeth-shaped wounds surrounded by ugly black and purple bruising. He says he eventually got his gun and shot at it, but he wasn't sure he even hit it since it was thrashing him around with its teeth, like a dog trying to rip chunks off, and he was in a blaze of pain and panic. He called for help over the radio for the first time in his life. He's one of those super glue it shut and sanitize it with whiskey types. When the Rangers got there, the deer was long gone, but Rob was still laying in the dirt, clutching his rifle like it was the last rope to shore in the rapids, spouting off nonsense about hearing the mule deer's ears flap in around while it wrenched its head back and forth, and how he ain't never seen hate in a deer's eyes before. Rangers said he looked like he lost a fight to a bear with dentures. Not a fucking vampire mule deer, but the bruising. You know how much force it takes for herbivore teeth to break skin? What the fuck could make a deer do that? Chronic wasting disease doesn't exist in Oregon. Epizootic hemorrhagic disease makes deer stupid and dead, not violent. And sure, plenty of hunters have been killed by deer defending themselves or what have you, but they kick and jab with their antlers, not bite like fucking Cujo. Normally, I would shrug this kind of stuff off as bored small-town people exaggerate stories for something to do. But I can't deny the proof in the injuries at least. There have been some other stories around town too. Matt, the Millers' teen grandson, swore up and down that a deer killed his cat and ate part of it. His parents keep saying it must have been a coyote or a bobcat, and Matt's just freaked out about the deer. But Matt will tell you he saw it, in that kind of panicked way only a kid who's seen too much, but understands too little, can. I kind of believe him. I don't want to get to the bottom of all this because of curiosity, or because I think I'm so clever I can sleuth out what fish and game and the Rangers haven't been able to. I want to know because I'm scared. I woke up this morning around 3 a.m. with that sick feeling of dread that only accompanies a threat your primal animal brain has processed but your conscious human one hasn't. I sat up and took a look out of my window, and what I saw struck me still. There was a deer standing out there, watching me sleep. It didn't spook when I spotted it. This thing was nose to the window, so close its breath fogged nearly the whole lower half of the window. I was frozen in place for what must have been upwards of 10 minutes, and I swear on my mother's life, I never saw that thing blink once. I understand now what Rob meant about the hate he saw in the deer's eyes that day. If I find out more, or something else of note happens, I'll post an update. Third story, the woods behind my house. Lately, I've found myself wondering what lurks in the woods behind my house. We recently moved into a beautiful home surrounded by a wooded area. The perfect place for our perfect family. Most recently, it has only been myself and our child at home, as my husband travels across the country for work. We have 2 large picture windows in our living room that just seem to encase the woods perfectly. I've found myself drawing the blinds more and more because while I'm staring out the window, I don't want to think of what could be staring in. As I was getting ready for bed, I realized I had forgotten to take pictures of our backyard for the new landscaper who was scheduled to arrive early the next morning. I grudgingly put my shoes on, cursing myself for not doing this in the daylight hours. I opened the curtains a crack and gazed out into the large backyard. I told myself not to let my mind wander. I'd just take the pictures and be done with it. I took a deep breath and opened the back door. I was met with nothing but the wind and the sound of crickets chirping. Feeling my nerves settle a little, I stepped into the yard and started taking my pictures. I had the sound off on my phone so the camera made no noise. I was ready to finish up, just a couple of pictures left, when I heard a rustle come from the tree line. I tried to put it out of my head and finish so I could get back inside to the safety of my home. I turned to walk the several steps back to my back door and heard a low growl. That was all it took for me to hit a full sprint. All I could think about was getting back inside. I had to get back inside. I made it to the door and went to slam it behind me, but something was pushing on the other side of the door. Growling, desperately scratching and pushing, trying to get into my home. I was no match strength-wise for whatever this beast was, no matter how hard I tried. The beast shoved the door in and sent me to the floor. I immediately curled into a ball trying to protect myself, and whatever this thing was immediately started attacking me. Claws and teeth dug into my flesh. I wanted to scream out so badly, but I knew no one would hear me. All I could think about was letting it finish with me and be on its way. After all, I had a baby sleeping in the other room. The beast mutilated every inch of my body. I didn't understand how I was possibly still alive. I could feel myself slipping further and further away every time my heart beat. The beast stood up on its hind legs. The only way I can describe it is something like an emaciated werewolf. It was missing patches of hair all over its body, and it smelled like rotting flesh. He stood over me, and it almost seemed like he was admiring his work. The beast turned toward the back door to leave, and at that very moment I heard a faint cry from the other room. My 1-year-old. I begged with everything left in me for him to turn around and walk out the door. The beast gave what sounded like a slight chuckle and headed for my baby's room. That's when I lost consciousness. The next day, I woke up in a hospital room surrounded by doctors who explained to me that I had undergone an extensive surgery to repair my injuries, and my husband had been contacted and was on his way home. When my husband arrived at the hospital, the police came in and explained to us that they were still searching for whoever did this to me and my baby. But I knew they would never find my sweet boy. My husband and I packed up what was left our lives and moved to a small condo in the middle of town. I no longer find myself wondering what was lurking in the woods behind my house. I found out the hard way. Fourth story, the hunt for a Wendigo. Ever since I found out about Wendigos, I've been obsessed with them. They're mythical creatures that are rooted in the Algonquin-based Native American folklore. They have heightened senses, they're extremely fast, unnaturally large, and strong. These are all advantages that help them stalk their prey. I'm so intrigued by them because no one knows if they actually exist. I've spent hours researching about them. I know pretty much everything about them. The Wendigo is pretty much the embodiment of gluttony. Always consuming yet never satisfied, they're always at the point of starvation. I've read about so many skinwalker and Wendigo encounters, but no one actually knows if the stories are true. So neither do I. That's why Rose, Charles, and I made a group for hunting mythical creatures. We go out into the forest sometimes to look for the creatures. We haven't had any luck yet. I love to talk to my grandpa about them, and hearing his stories about them are always the best. Every time he tells me a story at the end of it, he says, "Don't go near the northern forests of the Atlantic coast and Great Lakes region of the United States and Canada." The thing about this is that I am too curious, and I live near the forest he talks about. It's 25 minutes away walking distance. I know my way around the forest because of my map, and it's so close to my house. I've been there before with my friends, but we've never been that deep into it. The doorbell rings as I get a message. I open my phone. The message says, "I'm here." I walk downstairs to the front so I can open the door. As I look through and open the door, I see Rose and Charles. "Hi," said Rose eagerly. Charles groans. "Hey, are you ready yet?" "We just walked here to make sure that you were ready," Rose added. "Yeah, come inside really quick. I have some stuff I need to grab," I insisted. Rose exclaimed, "I got a new tracker this weekend." "Is it actually a good one this time?" Charles murmured. Rose states sarcastically, Yes, I would totally buy a broken tracker." "I'm messing around with you, geez," Charles snickered. We all head out of the house and in the direction of the forest. About 30 minutes later, we make it to the edge of the forest. I take a deep breath looking into the slight fog and menacing atmosphere of the viridian-tinted forest. Minutes passed until I broke my eyes free before entering the forest. This time the atmosphere was different. It was so thick, eerie, and it felt alive. I've never actually believed that I would encounter a Wendigo. We just enjoy going exploring and pretending that we'll run into it. We walked through the forest for what felt like hours. I knew it was the deepest we've ever gone in, and I had lost where we were on the map. Rose flustered with concern. "Hey, we've been walking for hours. Are you sure you know where we're going or how to get back?" "Yeah, don't worry, Rose. I have my map and compass with me." We came into the forest from the west, and we're heading north toward the caves, I reassured. "Everything looks the same around here," Rose scolded. "I mean, they are all just trees and bushes," Charles smirked. We walk deeper into the forest as dusk falls upon us. The golden-pink horizon illuminated over the forest, leaves and shrubs creating beautiful shadows. We walked for a little while until we stumble upon what looks like a slaughtered animal. All we see is red, blood red. The cedar trunks of the trees, the mossy green ground, the evergreen shrubs. Those colors were no longer vibrant greens, only objects doused in blood. I can't believe my eyes. There was no words, just silence. I couldn't tear my eyes from this gruesome, mutilated mess of whatever it was. Could an animal really do something like this? I questioned if we were alone in these woods. Minutes passed with terror in our bones, dead silence, no animals in sight. Not a single sound carried through the forest as the sun falls behind the horizon, until I hear a few branches breaking from in front of the bloodbath. I look ahead of the mess into the darkness, only to see two bright, frosty-colored eyes peering into my soul from within the obsidian-shaded forest. More branches break through the forest ahead of us, approaching closer, slowly stalking us in the darkness. As I look closer at this horrendous monster's outline, as it approaches, I see something hanging from its mouth. I think that it's a hunk of flesh, but I can't make it out. I fix my gaze towards its hand, and I'm instantly filled with terror. I knew what this was. I see a hunk of flesh in its mouth. Its unnaturally long and bony fingers are gripping onto a human head. It was the thing I've been looking for. I can't believe it. I never thought I would actually run across one of them. That face, the abnormally large body with skin stretched across all of its bones. I knew right then and there I had to run. I had to run for my life. It was now or never. Ah! Rose squealed as she realized what was in the forest with us. I turned around as fast as I could. My friends and I started running for our lives. Shortly after, I could hear it intently chasing after us. Branches snapping behind us as we run with no direction. The Wendigo lets out an inhumanly screech. My heart is pounding as we all hide, hoping the creature doesn't find us. We're all so exhausted and out of breath, yet trying not to move or make a sound. We listen closely as we hear cracking of twigs inching closer to our vicinity. That's when I heard the most eerie sound in my life. Not too far into the woods, I heard a soft voice of a little girl asking for help. "Help! Please! Someone come help me!" pleaded the small girl. It can mimic voices? What is this? I mean, there can't be a little girl out here this deep in the forest all by herself, right? Without hesitation, Rose jumps out of her hiding spot and goes to try and help the small girl. "Hey, little girl dash," Rose murmured. Within second of her speaking, I hear her vocals cut out, and I heard nothing else but the horrific sounds of something I couldn't even imagine. I look out from my hiding spot to see Rose completely mangled and her blood all over the soil. I couldn't believe it. Why did she do that? She knew it was after us. I can't help but stare, and my friend is just gone like that, and I couldn't even help her. I'm so sorry, Rose. We should have never come here. I brought you here and I never should have done that. Hey guys, you can come out now, it's safe. The monster ran away, Rose reassured. Oh my, Rose, how could it do this to us? It stole her voice and now it's trying to lure us out. These things are sick. I heard what that thing did to her. She can't be alive. There's no way I could let it trick me like this. I look hastily at the creature from my hiding spot as I wait for my opportunity to run out of this place for good. It felt like I must have been waiting there for hours, waiting for this thing to leave, because it knew we were hiding somewhere there. Through the dark, ominous forest, there was stray beams of light and laughter approaching. The creature heard the laughter and branches and decided that it was done here. It wanted to go after whoever was over there. So that's when we took our chance to run west and get the hell out of that forest. I ran until my feet blistered. At the sight of lights, I sighed in relief, then collapsed to the ground as I'm panting, choking on the fresh air, bawling my eyes out with Charles. I feel sorry for those people, but I barely made it out alive myself. Rose wasn't as lucky as we were. I collected myself after crying and shaking on the ground for what felt like ages. I got up, gave the forest my last goodbye, and went on my way through the dark night, illuminated by only stars in the sky and the empty street lights. Never again have Charles or me mention this to each other or anyone again. It's buried as deep in our memories as far as they could go. Fifth story. There is something evil living in Denali National Park. When I sit back and think about every job I've ever had, I'm forced to admit that those first few days in Denali Park were some of the most peaceful of my life. As anyone in the NPS will tell you, getting a paid position isn't very easy these days, but there are a lot of volunteer openings out there. Getting out of the city and into the tranquility of nature was an amazing experience for an 18-year-old fresh out of high school. No parents telling you what you should do. No colleges trying to suck you dry. Just hundreds of miles of Alaskan forest. Little did I know how much I would grow to fear that solitude. There were only 4 of us out there at Crabapple Lookout. The posting was an unpaid volunteer job, accounting for the fact that no sane person wanted to be stuck out in the forest for the entire summer. We were a long way from any tourist trails. I was the new guy, and James Shome was our lead ranger. The 2 others were Carol and Eddie. None of us got to spend much time together in the end, but they were good people. It all started with Eddie. We were on day 9 of a 3-month observatory period in the forest. and he radioed in one evening while out collecting soil samples. It was Shom's shift in the radio tower at the time. Carol and I were playing cards in the longhouse when he found us. "We have a problem," Shom said, his tone serious. "What's up, Jim?" Carol asked. I raised an eyebrow at Shom, both curious about the situation and hoping to distract Carol from my poor hand. "Eddie has been out for 5 hours now, not reporting in on the radio," he replied. Carol nodded slowly. This kind of thing had happened before. Someone got caught up with taking pictures or writing notes and lost track of time. I recalled that Eddie carried a book with him everywhere. Maybe he was reading that. "Anything we should be doing?" I interjected. "You just worry about your cards, newbie," Carol teased. My sole consolation was that she would have nowhere to spend my money for quite a while. "I'm going to go check the radio again," Shom said. "If he doesn't respond, we might have trouble." He left us to our game. I was about to fold when the door to the longhouse opened again. Shom's long shadow fell on the table, and he regarded us grimly. For the first time since I met the veteran ranger, I saw unease in his hardened features. "Come," he ordered sharply, already turning to leave. We scrambled after him, the card game forgotten. I made sure to grab my coat on the way out. The nights here could get chilly very fast. "What's going on, Jim?" Carol asked Shom. I glanced around as we walked down the camp trail. From what I could figure, we were heading towards the motor pool. Eddie responded. Shom's voice betrayed no fear, which was more than I could say for myself. "We're going to go get him. I've already got the jeeps ready." I dared to ask what happened to him, but Shom gave no response. Carol squeezed my shoulder reassuringly. "Probably got spooked by a raccoon or something," she joked, trying to alleviate my nerves. Despite her outwardly cheerful attitude, though, I sensed an undercurrent of unease in my partner, the fear it wasn't a raccoon that scared Eddie. An experienced ranger doesn't radio in for something so trivial. 2 jeeps soon came into view, protected by a tarped awning. Shom regarded them for a moment, his eyes analyzing. "Fine," our leader finally said, and walked to the trunk of the first jeep while we waited in the light of the setting sun. He flipped open the trunk and removed 3 assault rifles, giving them a quick check before slinging them over his shoulder. "What the hell?" I raised my hands, backing away. "I thought this was a tree hugger sort of job. What's with the guns?" "You didn't need assault rifles to deter an angry bear." Shom chuckled softly. "It's time that you learned what this job is really about, kid." "What the hell do you mean by that?" I looked to Carol for aid, but she wouldn't meet my eyes. "We aren't here to take soil samples and experiment on plants," Shom said, walking around the side of the jeep. "There are dark things in these woods, and it's our job to keep them from getting out." "Look," I said, "that sounds great and all, but last year I was still in classes with 14-year-olds. I didn't sign up for this." He handed one of the assault rifles to Carol, and she slung it over her shoulder with a familiar ease. I was definitely the odd man out here. "Take it." Shom held a rifle out to me. I eyed it as if it was a 2-foot-long centipede, ready to bite me should I try to touch it. After a long moment, I took the gun from him. Heavier than I thought it would be. "I really can't stay here while you guys look for him?" I asked, suspecting I already knew the answer. "No." A trace of pity entered Shom's voice, or maybe I imagined it. "It's not safe here now that someone is missing." "Sorry, Jack." "Great, then. You're riding with me," Carol said, hopping into the second jeep. Shom closed the trunk on his own jeep before taking the driver's seat. "All right, people," he intoned gravely. "This might be nothing, but it might be a very bad something. Either way, We have to go get Eddie back. Shom was a man of simple words, but they were an effective booster nonetheless. I felt my resolve harden. Eddie was out there alone, and we were his friends. He was counting on us to come get him. Shom's Jeep started with a scratchy thrum of power. We're going to where his radio last reported a signal. Our own Jeep's engines barked harshly, and then we were off. We followed close behind, our headlights casting foreboding shadows on the dark road ahead. Normally the sound of frogs and bugs filled the nighttime air, but tonight the forest was silent. I didn't much like it, and I could tell Carol was similarly agitated by her tight grip on the steering wheel. "So you guys have been lying to me this whole time?" I asked. "You're all monster hunters or something, and you wanted some fresh meat?" She sighed. "It's not like that, Jack. We were going to tell you tonight. Shom wanted you to get used to the woods before we sprung it on you. Why even hire an 18-year-old? There's got to be more qualified people for this kind of job." "There were," she replied flatly. "Last year, there were 8 of us. The year before that, Shom says there were 13. This is my 2nd year." I leaned back in my seat. "I see." We said nothing for a while. The walls of thick forest to either side of us seemed to be bending inwards, like a dark tunnel carrying us into the underworld. The park looked so different at night. "So, what did Eddie say when he radioed in?" I yelled ahead, hoping to learn more about whatever we were driving into. This was my first time going this deep into the wilderness, and I wanted to be ready for anything. A moment passed before Shom shouted his reply. He said we should stay away. He said we would be too late to stop it. My blood ran cold, and I asked no more. 20 minutes passed before a glint of water appeared through the trees. Shom pulled to the side of the road, and we stopped close behind him. As I hopped out of the Jeep, the smell of rotting plant matter and fresh blood became disgustingly apparent. Shom motioned us to gather together while I glanced around nervously. Suddenly, the assault rifle hanging from my shoulder seemed like a very comforting weight. "Okay, kids," Shom said. "No splitting up, no loud noises, no flashlights. We look around for Eddie. We grab him. We get out. No complaints were raised from us. I don't think anyone wanted to go off alone anyway. We broke quietly through the trees to the shore, or quite noisily in my case. I could imagine some bear eyeing me from the tree line, planning its midnight snack. Carol must have noticed my fear, because she smiled wearily at me as we moved down the beach. "Hang in there, Jack," she said, her easygoing tone betraying her years of experience in the field. I have to admit, the 2 tried-and-true rangers carrying guns did lend some reassurance. I just couldn't get Eddie's words out of my head. Too late to stop it. Stop what, I wonder? Got something, Shom declared, his foot nudging at something in the sand. "It's a walkie." Sure enough, Eddie Ariano's radio was in his hand a moment later. "No sign of any damage," he reported, turning the instrument around. Shom frowned. He just turned it off. An uneasy shudder went through the group. Why would Eddie shut his radio off in the middle of nowhere? A better question, suggested a very frightened part of my mind, was if it was Eddie that turned it off at all. My eye caught on an anomaly in the sand. I knelt down, pulling a book from the loose grip of the beach. I didn't recognize the peculiar markings on the cover, but a worn label read, "The Maribon Manuscript." "Eddie's book," Carol mused. "He hasn't been without it since we were dropped off." "I don't like this," Shom muttered, his eyes scanning the beach. "I don't like this at all." I felt a hand grab mine and almost screamed, but it was Carol. She looked almost as scared as I knew I felt. I squeezed her hand, like she had my shoulder earlier. We had to stick together, for Eddie's sake. A piercing scream broke the silence, and I felt my heart drop into my lower intestines. We turned to see Eddie, naked and covered in blood, running towards us from the trees. His eyes were wide and unblinking. "I told you to be careful with that damned book, Eddie," Sho muttered, shaking his head. "I should have known better." Eddie began running in a circle around us, chanting in a language I couldn't identify. Shom, Carol and I backed up into each other, so we had all sides covered. "You weren't supposed to come here." Eddie screamed shrilly. "He wants me, not you. I'm the one who said the words." "What words?" Carol shouted, struggling to make herself audible over Eddie's mad babbling. "The manuscript," he yelled. "Delos Yarnum Colix Maribon." I gasped in sudden pain. The manuscript was now unbearably hot against the crook of my arm, like a rectangle of molten iron. I dropped it to the sand, and we watched as it sunk into the beach. "Yes." Eddie danced maniacally in front of us. "He's coming." "Holy shit," Carol yelled, pointing out at the lake. I turned to look and froze in place. The water was bubbling and frothing, churning around some great organic mass emerging from the center of the lake. I could barely make out scales and teeth in the darkness, and yellow eyes blinking awake. The creature started to move towards us swiftly. Waves flew up 5 feet high as it advanced, like a mini tsunami of otherworldly origin. None of us moved for a terrified moment. Everyone thinks they know how will they react when faced with true terror, but it is easy to say brave things while sitting on your living room couch. We were snapped out of it by the ear-splitting crack of Shom's assault rifle firing at the creature. For a moment, I heard nothing but the pulse of gunfire against my eardrums. "Take the kid back to the jeep," he shouted at Carol, reloading. "Eddie, start shooting or get out of the way." We moved quickly, Carol and I taking off at a sprint towards the tree line with the firing ranger not far behind. I could feel the ground shift as the creature impacted the shore, and spared a look behind me. The night was dark, but I saw enough to haunt my nightmares even today. The beast was the size of our longhouse. It had 4 arms or legs. I couldn't tell which were which, with hungry mouths on the ends of all of them. Teeth ran up and down its scaled torso, gnashing and snarling like a rabid dog. There was no discernible head, but ancient angry eyes shone in the moonlight on the parts of its body that had no teeth. That was when I saw it reach Eddie. He jumped towards the monster, a grin on his face. "Hurry!" Carol screamed as we broke through the trees to the jeeps. I could hear Eddie's delighted laughter behind us, even as his bones snapped. This is what he wanted. The gunfire continued with the background music of what sounded like thick soup being sucked through a straw, and my dinner threatened to leave my body. I slid in the seat next to Carol, and she frantically fumbled with the keys. Eddie's laughter stopped. Shom's gun kept firing, getting closer to us. The jeep finally roared to life as Shom emerged panting from the brush. I could hear the thing crushing trees behind him, impossibly fast and yet still coming. "Wait!" I screamed in Carol's ear, grabbing the wheel. I motioned for Shom to get in, and he moved 2 steps before a shadow fell over him. "We have to go," Carol yelled, trying to take the wheel back. I looked over my shoulder, meeting eyes with the old ranger. Thick red saliva dripped onto his hat, but I didn't dare look up. Shom mouthed the word "go" to me, and then put the rifle barrel to his chin. Carol shoved me aside and took control of the jeep. One last gunshot rang out, sending my ears into a ringing symphony. Shom fell to his knees, and to my horror I saw that he was still alive, his untouched eye blinking rapidly as blood and brains ran down his face. The last thing I saw before we flew down the trail was a pulsing mouth reaching down into the darkness. I wish I could give you a happy ending to this story, but there isn't one. Carol didn't stop driving until we reached a tourist trail, and then we found a camper with a satellite phone. The next few days were a blur of repeating the same story to different law enforcement agencies, and then a search was conducted despite our warnings. They wanted us to come help look considering we were the last people to have seen the other rangers, but neither Carol or I could bring ourselves to go back to Denali National Park. They searched for miles around Crabapple Lookout and even pulled the lake to try to find the bodies. No one found anything, not even Eddie's radio or the Maribon manuscript. Whatever had lived in that lake, it did a hell of a good job cleaning up. The radio had been left behind for a reason the first time. For the same reason deer hunters leave food on their hunting trails. We had been lured and massacred. Carol and I were initially suspects before they realized we were too shell-shocked to be lying about any of it. The official report says Shom and Eddie drowned in that lake, but we know what really happened. Carol was committed to a mental health facility not too long after the incident, and I reckon that's where I would have gone too if not for the support of my parents. The thought of that many-mouthed creature still out there terrifies me beyond comprehension. How long did it live at Denali National Park before we woke it up? 1,000 years? 10,000 years? There are things on this earth humans have not yet met that we were maybe never meant to meet in the first place. That night in Denali, we discovered there is another level of the food chain we cannot begin to understand. One day I know I will meet that creature again, a promise I beheld in its lidless and unforgetting eyes. And for that day I keep a handgun in my bedroom drawer, not for the mouths, but for myself.